Hello everyone, today we're going to be covering the top 10 mainline best-selling Pokemon games of all time. Let's start with number 10. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Based on the popular first-generation Pokemon game Pokemon Yellow, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was released in 2018. It was one of the first mainline titles to appear on the Switch, making use of the Joy-Cons to throw Pokeballs at the screen. It was also one of the first to have roaming Pokemon appear in the overworld. There were, however, some complaints about the game, that it was too easy, shared XP always being on, as well as random battles no longer occurring. This didn't stop the fact that it sold 15.07 million units, which is definitely no small chunk of change. We have yet to see a return to the Let's Go series, but it wouldn't surprise me if Let's Go Soul Silver, for example, was announced next year. Coming in at number 9, we have Pokemon Black and White. These were the first titles released for the 5th generation of Pokemon. Released in 2010 on the Nintendo DS, Black and White introduced us to 156 new Pokemon, and it is based on the 14th season of the anime series. The series was praised for innovating some gameplay aspects, adding in seasonal cycles, rotation battles, as well as continuing to use the fully animated Pokemon sprites, and most importantly, triple battles. It sold just over our 10th place entry with 15.64 million copies sold, as well as being the fastest Nintendo DS title to sell 5 million copies. Number 8. Ruby and Sapphire. Released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance with gameplay that remains similar to previous games, however the title did provide some innovation with new spins on previous mechanics, like the inclusion of double battles, Pokemon abilities, the Pokemon contests that were run at the time, and of course the inclusion of 135 new Pokemon that were added to the Pokedex. Selling 16.22 million copies worldwide, this honestly surprised me, as I thought Generation 3 had done better on this list, but coming in number 8 is not too shabby either way. At number 7 we have Pokemon Sun and Moon, based on the 20th season of the anime series and released in 2016 for the 3DS. Pokemon Sun and Moon introduced us to 81 new Pokemon. Notably, this is a pretty low number that was made up for by the introduction of the Alolan forms for the previous generation Pokemon. Alongside the Z moves that were added to the game, these titles count as being the beginning of the 7th generation of Pokemon games. These games were praised for the inclusion of the 3D polygonal graphics as well as greater trainer customization. However, personally, I remember reading about how the first several hours of this game was handheld by overbearing tutorials and protected gameplay. I've never played these titles myself, but let me know your thoughts about them in the comments section below. They sold a combined 16.29 million copies and were considered the fastest selling 3DS games at the time, beating out our number 6th entry. Number 6. Pokemon X and Y. Released in 2013 for the 3DS, Pokemon X and Y added 72 new Pokemon to the game, as well as a bunch of new features. Fairy types were introduced, as well as a new form of Pokemon evolution known as Mega Evolution. Mega Evolutions allowed players to further evolve fully evolved Pokemon. This was a key selling point for these games, as 30 new Mega Evolutions were included in these titles. As you can tell, Nintendo liked to include a spin on existing Pokemon when they felt that the number of new Pokemon introduced wouldn't meet fan expectations. Pokemon X and Y ended up selling 16.65 million units, just a tiny bit over the total for Sun and Moon. Coming in at number 5, Diamond and Pearl. Released on the Nintendo DS in 2006, these are the 4th generation entries into the Pokemon franchise, adding 107 new Pokemon to the Pokedex. Additional features such as internet play over Nintendo's Wi-Fi connection was also introduced, as well as some minor changes to the battle mechanics. Classifications for Pokemon moves were changed. Physical, special, and status categories were introduced. Other than that, Game Freak experimented with altering the frequency of the day and night cycle. Overall, the game sold 17.67 million copies and sits at a solid 85 out of 100 score on Metacritic, with reviewers' main critique of the title being that it remained too similar to previous games, in both the storyline and the gameplay. But hey, more of the same clearly isn't an issue if you're still selling this many units. Number 4, Scarlet and Violet. This being released only recently on the Nintendo Switch in 2022 really goes to show that it's sold quite well, especially considering it's made its way to number 4 on our list. These are the first games we've seen in the 9th generation of Pokemon. Scarlet and Violet introduced us to 110 new Pokemon, along with 2 new regional forms. The game brought back some popular features, such as large open areas where wild Pokemon would be spotted roaming. The game's gimmick is based around time-displaced Pokemon that could transform into Terra types. The game, while selling quite well, did receive some heavy criticism, especially with the barrage of memes based on the fact that the graphics felt painfully lackluster compared to other titles on the Switch, and that the overall game seemed to have felt rushed. Overall, it did sell 20.61 million, 10 million of which were sold in the first 3 days, making it the biggest launch in Nintendo's history. And while it is number 4 currently, it's very possible that it will continue to climb the ranks of this list. Number 3, Gold and Silver. Pokemon Gold and Silver released for the Game Boy Color in 1999. The Johto saga of the Pokemon anime is based on the new region which was introduced by these games. The gameplay matches the original formula, but added some additional features, mainly that Pokemon could now hold items. Berries were introduced, as well as a new wide variety of Pokeballs. The game also used a real-time internal clock to keep track of the date, as well as the time in-game. This would trigger events in-game, as well as when certain Pokemon would appear depending on the time of day. Very importantly, trainer rematching was also introduced. These titles sold a combined 23.73 million units. Not bad numbers at all. Number 2, Sword and Shield. Released in 2019 for the Nintendo Switch, Sword and Shield made a big splash. It's the first installments in the 8th generation of Pokemon, and the first games to be released on the console after Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which many players considered to be spin-offs instead of true to the series. The title also contained 2 downloadable content expansion packs, which were relatively new for the series at the time. Sword and Shield introduced 81 new Pokemon to the base game, 89 in total with the DLCs, along with 13 regional forms for pre-existing Pokemon. The gimmick for this game was based around the concept of Dynamaxing, which would increase the size of your Pokemon as well as their stats. This title overall was the first to introduce large open-world areas where players could catch Pokemon. These titles were met with some backlash at launch due to not including all previous Pokemon in the Pokédex. Personally, I have some mixed feelings about this title. The experience felt fresh, and I did enjoy playing it, but it also felt like a breeze to play through, and I have absolutely no urge to revisit it since playing. Sword and Shield sold a total of 25.68 million copies. And coming in at number 1, we have Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue. Released for the Game Boy in 1996, it's no surprise that Generation 1 made the biggest splash in terms of sales. Introducing us to the original 151 Pokemon, with the popularity pushed at the same time by the anime series, it laid the foundation for the gameplay that is still used today. The player controls the protagonist and navigates through different areas with the quest to beat his rival, the Elite Four, and collect all 151 species of Pokemon. I always come back to this title every couple of years to dump some time into it, as they possess many fond memories for me. A time when access to the internet was limited and you really had to problem solve the game instead of being able to look up a walkthrough when you were stuck. I remember countless battery changes in order to beat it for the very first time, and for that reason, I'll always hold this title in very high regard. That's been it for the list of the best-selling Pokemon games of all time. What surprised you? What didn't? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe if you like the content and ring that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. I'll catch you in the next one.